Now I'd like to take a perspective of looking at site analysis and mapping. I like to think about this as a permaculture perspective on this exercise. Remember, just like the term master plan, that's typically derived from architecture and engineering, so is site analysis and mapping. But in permaculture, we take a little bit of different view on it. We're not as particular about accuracy or scale as they may be, right? We don't use as maybe fancy programs as they might have access to. I didn't go to 4 years of school to learn how to draw something, okay? I don't need to do it that well to portray to my audience what I'm trying to do, okay? So permaculture's perspective on this is a little bit easier. Very simply, this is a site. Again, no color. I could color this, and color is definitely nice. People like color, guys. But I, through just the lines, can graphically represent to what I'm trying to say. So this would be a person's or stylized site analysis, or they're going to do a sector analysis. So here's their site, and they're going to overlay, and they're trying to communicate to us the wild energies, the energies that are interacting with the site. So they have the sun angle represented by the sun. So they're showing where the sun direction comes from. That's obviously an energy hitting the site. They have the representation of a cloud blowing the wind, so north wind. They have noise, so they may have issues with loud noise entering their site, and people, pedestrians entering their site. So these are things that they're now going to describe. They don't like their neighbors' dogs barking. There's too much noise in the street. It's really hot in the summer at the front of the house, and it's freaking cold in the winter. So this would give them indications of how they're going to block, accept, or utilize these energies, right? So this is a sector analysis. So if we look at a site, what do we look for? Number one, describe the climate. Where is it located? What's the climate like? When does it rain? How many sunny days are there a year? A lot of this information is quite easy to find on the internet. Put in wherever you live, climate, okay? What's the landform? Describe the topography. Is it hilly? Is it flat? Next, what's the water supply? Where are you going to get water from? Is there grid water when you start? Do you have to do a well? Are you going to be beholden on only rainwater harvesting, or are you going to dig a pond? Next, we can look at access. How do I access the property? Where is the principal access? Is there multiple accesses, meaning that there's a side access possibly? Can be handy. What about plant systems? What is already there? So when I do the analysis, what types of plants are there are going to give me an indication of what grows well on that property. So if I see like a pear tree and it's doing really good, wow, that pear tree is growing really nice. Well, what other trees like the same conditions as pears? This would be an indication of what may grow well. What microclimates may be present on the site? Do I see rock outcroppings, right? So they may hold heat. Do they have a gully? Is there something like a forested area? So I could see that there's different shade patterns, so I could look at different microclimates. Structures, what's already on the property? So list those, right? Where are they located? What are their purposes also? What could I repurpose them to do? Fences, are there any fences or boundaries? What are the natural boundaries of your site, and if there's any existing fencing on the site? And the soil, what type of soil is present? And really important, have you got a soil test before you bought the property? So it may be interesting to say, hey, I think that's bad soil because they grow monoculture corn on it. But man, what if somebody had actually, I don't know, dumped some kind of toxic waste, heavy metal stuff, and there's actually too much iron or something. And at which time they're still selling the corn because they're unethical about their intentions, right? But then I want to put my garden, and now I'm going to poison my family. It's not very smart. So I might want to test the soil, actually physically take some and test it. And if I was going to make an agreement to purchase the property, I sure would make sure that it was contingent on the soil being good, right? So climate, it can be the primary limiting factor of your design. For instance, if you're in a temperate, mild summers in like Europe, that's going to limit what you can do there. You may not be able to grow bananas, for instance. Many useful plants are adapted to continental climates. So that might actually be a nice thing where we can get like warm and cooler plants at the same time. So, but we have to understand that the climate's going to dictate what you can grow. Winter frost can also be very limiting. So if you want to do agriculture and try to support your family and say, I'm going to grow 60, 75% of my food, I may not want to be in a place that has frost. It may be very difficult to achieve that without homesteading activities, which are intensive fermentation. and animal systems, okay? Without animal protein in cold climates, pretty much Westerners cannot survive. So these are things that if I want that lifestyle or diet, I might want to live in a place that's easier to grow my food. So landform. Well, it's relatively unchangeable. It's a lot of energy and impact to try to change landform. So make sure you like the land. What's the water drainage, the soil conditions? Is it sandy? Then I can't hold any water? Or is it so clayey that it floods? Are there any exposed rocks? If there's exposed rocks, that might cost a lot of money to remove that rock. I might not be able to build foundations. If I try to do agriculture, I can't use any equipment because of this big rock outcrop. What is the altitude of the property? What could dictate maybe I have fruiting. So if we think like Sepp Holzer has a great videos about high altitude growing, different fruits would fruit at different times dependent on altitude, right? And if you get too high, you may not get any yield at all. What's the gradient? Really slope. Too much slope is going to have an erosionary event, right? So that might not be beneficial. And most of the time, we can find this out from a contour map. So it might be very important to create at the beginning of our property a contour map of the property so that we can evaluate gradients and different things. So a design note though, variable and diverse sites are often the most useful. The perfectly flat site doesn't have a lot of options, but a slope gives me the option to put in more things. So sometimes permaculturalists would actually look for sites that had more slope. Not too much, like super steep's not good, but a nice gentle slope allows me to, like for instance, put a dam when we do earthworks. If I put a dam at the top of the property and I catch water at the top of my property, well, I have a battery, right? I'm holding energy. I can let the water out, microhydro, run my house. So that diversity of slope allowed me to do things like put water at height in the landscape. I would have pressure, free energy. So that diverse landscapes can be nice. Local rainfall is important, its distribution, and also its reliability. So if it doesn't rain or it's not reliable rainfall, I may be forced, the only way I can do agriculture or grow my food is with irrigation. And then that irrigation costs money, right? I have to pump the water. So then I have to store the water. So I have to invest in storing the water, invest in pumping the water because the rainfall is not reliable. Drainage or water retention properties in the soil. Here at Raktamachat, we have like really high clay, which is good for rice farming, not so good for other things, good for building our houses. But we have flooding, sometimes issues with flooding. If we go to Panya, which is in a different part of the country, they have too much sand. So they have really bad water retention. So when they're watering their garden, it all drains out. So it's really difficult for them. So they're trying to add in water retention, and we're trying to like alleviate water retention. So understand the soil properties. For them, if they dig a pond, they can't hold water. It's too sandy. We can hold water, but we have flooding. So there's always a yin and a yang. So you want to understand those conditions. Soil cover. If you look, is there any cover? That's the humic. That's the topsoil. How much topsoil is nutrition? That's food, right? So a really good topsoil is money. If we come here, because they clear a jungle, 20 years of corn, there's no topsoil. Zero. So all the humic material I have to make myself. That's a lot of work. So if there was an inch of topsoil, man, that would be that's a lot of topsoil, right? So that can be valuable. So I bought the land, it's cheap, but I didn't get any topsoil. Yeah, another property with more topsoil may be more valuable. What about animals? When you do the site analysis, what animals did you see? Like wild animals, for instance, were there squirrels, raccoons, moles? They got lots of invasive things that'll really tear up our gardens. So if I saw signs of that, do I realize I have to like try to alleviate that problem? What about deer? So now deer walk through, so I see deer tracks, and then they come and eat my garden. I have to put up like 8-foot fences. Now, is that aesthetic? I want a garden in a cage. A lot of people have issues when they have wild animals, right? What are you going to do to alleviate that problem? So design note, plants, they're the main way to control how much water is needed because I can get plants like succulents or like we had the Napier we saw today. It collects the water in the rainy season and it stores the water in the biomass in the dry season. So that water is standing up in the field. And when I go to cut it, I feed it, the cow gets water and food. It's stored in the mass. It's a very appropriate plant in a dry land condition like this because it can store that. Think about bananas. I get fruit even in the dry season because the banana, when it was rain, took the water into the biomass and then it utilizes that to make the banana in the dry season. Papaya, same way. Papaya can make papaya fruiting in the dry season because it stored the water in the biomass of the tree. So these are appropriate plants when I have a lack of rainfall in a certain event. I still get fruit. Think about what is a really nice aloe. Aloe stores water. So even in the dry season, you still have nice aloe year-round. Didn't have to water. Access, your roads. Where's the road? What is the right-of-way for that? If it's in an urban situation, stairs. You know, how long can I go upstairs? So I may buy my nice condo, but it only has stair access. I get too old, I can't go up the stairs. Now I need to sell. Yeah, things like this. Safety, we want to be secure. So if you buy a farm, right? What are the safety concerns or issues? What kind of support do you get from the local community about your safety concerns? Or zoning, what are you allowed to do? So before you buy a property thinking I want to do this, am I allowed to do that? You may want to check the local zoning before you purchase something and then they say you can't do that, and then 7 years later your place closes down because you broke the local zoning laws. Maybe you make too much noise. Right? Whatever your particular thing is. Maybe you make a smell because they don't like my agricultural system, whatever I'm doing, right? Design note, maximize the access to your property. I really wish I had like a side entrance so I could alleviate maybe the road traffic. I like that, and think about all the places we go on Raktamachat has access and paths. Every year, I'm maximizing, expanding the access. I get to the natural building because I have a road and access. I can get to the bungalows from access. I can get to the back of the farm where we got our farm waste, right? Because we had access. Plant systems can regulate your climate. So, for instance, if it's too hot, I can make shade. If my house is too cold, I can put ivy on the house to help regulate for insulation, right? I can utilize plants as indicator species also. If I look at a plant that's growing on a particular soil, I can search what is it like. So like if I saw, what if I saw a piece of property and I saw goldenrod growing on it? What would that be an indication of? There was gold deposits. Because that particular herb actually takes gold from gold. Well, I might want to buy that property if I was into gold speculating, right? Too bad it doesn't take very much. But these are things that we can see that certain plants like certain particular conditions and gives us an indicator of the soils and or the minerals within those soils. Microclimates. Well, different factors that we can look at. Topography creates microclimates, could be shading. Soils can make different soil conditions. So at Raktamachat, at the lower part, at our rice field level, we have very nice silty soils because in the erosion event. And at the top of the property, it's rocky and clayey soils. Very different soils. And only 200 meters away from each other, it's completely different, right? So we can have varying soils. Vegetation can be different. The vegetation that would be happy to live next to the rice field because there's lots of water would be much different than the vegetation that would live up on the upper rockier portion of the property. Water masses, how are they there? Where does the drainage come from? What structures are on your property, and regional climates. What is the climate within your region? And also think about, guys, it's not here, but climate change. Is it in your region going to get cooler, warmer, wetter, drier? Let's be clear here, climate change ain't all bad. A lot of climatologists around the world be saying that's going to be good. I mean, for instance, in Thailand, the climatologists believe that the rainfall pattern of the monsoon will increase by 10%. And it will be over a longer duration, which would allow them to do 2 corn crops per year, where right now they can do 1 and like 3/4. But a little bit extra rain, 2. Well, that doubled their agricultural capacity. Now, from them as an agricultural nation, if their agricultural capacity doubles, they may think that's good. Well, here's the issue. For them to get more water, someone else got less water. So what climate change is really about is, I don't want the climate to change in my lifetime. So is it going to change? Yeah. How fast? Who knows? So what are you going to do to mitigate it? If it's getting hotter, we can plant more trees. If we think there's going to be a more drought event, we can dig more reservoirs, right? If we think it's going to rain too much, we can use swales to hold back and alleviate flooding, right? We have to predict the extreme, because what's going to happen with climate change, it's extremes. So we need to look at the past extreme, and we need to design for more than that extreme. The extremes are getting bigger. Okay, so that's good design. We'll talk about more of that later. So we can measure temperatures. What's the maximum temperature? What's the minimum temperature? What's the maximum rainfall? What's the minimum rainfall? What's the maximum humidity? What's the relative humidity? It has a big effect on our plants. So when we go on more plant science, that makes a big difference to our yield. Wind speeds, yeah? They can knock down all of our crops. So high wind events, especially with like climate change, driven by increased storm events, could make a mitigation that, yeah, we got more rain, and that's good, but then all the corn blew down anyway because we have no windbreaks. So we may have to increase the windbreaks in order to mitigate the wind to actually benefit from the increased rain. Okay? That's a thing. If the temperatures rise, it's too hot. The rice yields are predicted to go down by 15%. So what is a mitigation? You go into the middle of the rice field, every 12 meters, we mound up a hill and plant a mango tree. I get mangoes. The mangoes create a dapple shading to lower the temperatures by transmitting humidity in the rice field. I offset, right, a lower rice yield, but I have great mango. And this is a way that we can look at it. So if the temperature is going up, create more shade. If the wind event's going up, put in more windbreaks, right? And if the rainfalls event is going up, we can change to different agricultural systems. One system may like rain, and if it's not enough rain, I have drought. I can change to a system that utilizes less water. Okay, so we adjust to the change. And we can do our best, if we believe change being driven by carbon, to sequester carbon, to reduce our carbon usage first, sequester carbon through our actions like biochar. So design note, one of the least used, most effective ways to enable abundance is microclimates. Creation of microclimates on your property allows you to have more diversity. Plants like different climates. Yeah, we walked by the nursery in there. We were looking at the vines today, right? That got cut. If we turned around and looked on the other side, what kind of vine was that growing? Well, that's a microclimate. That's a really dark area. Vanilla. So that's vanilla growing there. So now they're starting to side shoot. You can have one to take home. And at that point, in 2 years, I'll get my fruiting vanilla, and I'll have vanilla, and we'll have, imagine Len's baking with fresh vanilla. See? But it takes time. We have to plan for the microclimate. We have to grow to get to the yield. Structures. What are permanent structures on your site? What are they used for? What are the dimensions of them? What are their materials made out of? What colors are they? What is the transparency, meaning natural sunlight? How much sunlight comes into them? Would you like to increase the sunlight, decrease the sunlight? Would you like to make them more sustainable or more thermal mass, right? How can I imagine reusing them in a different way? Boundaries, your property and your zoning, what are they? Where are they located? And your soils, not your limiting factor, but we need to know things about it, and we're going to go over soil science later, but we need to know the structure. Like today, we were adding in the clays, we were adding in the chars for structure, right? We need to know the texture. When we make our compost, it's going to make that granular structure, which is called, when we look at that, that's basically the bacteria is called flocculated soils, and the soils become flocculated by polysaccharides. Basically, what is that? When the bacteria creates its waste, right, or nutrient, it's like glue, and it glues the soils together. And that's what keeps the soils, when water goes, from washing away. When we kill the bacteria in our soils by putting in too much fertilizer, the bacteria stops. It's called deflocculated soils. The glue goes away. And then when the rain comes, all the silt and everything washes away. So we'll look at that in a lot more detail. But we need to know, where's our water table? How far down is it to water? What's the pH typically of our thing? What's the parent rock? That's where our minerals come from. How much drainage do we have? Is it too clayey, too sandy? What can we do to alleviate drainage? Add char. Or toxicity. We really don't want to mess with contaminated. That's a governmental issue, man. So we can alleviate contamination through phytoremediation or photoremediation. So it is possible, and we'll talk about that in soils, how we can take toxicities out of soils. But from a gardening or a personal home level, you don't want to buy property that has toxicity. Test your soils before you buy.